Megan stood at the threshold of the living room, her eyes lowered, a tightness in her chest that had been building for weeks. The walls of their suburban home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold, suffocating. Richard, her husband, for 15 years, sat on the couch, his face flushed with anger. Beside him, his mother Gloria, perched on her throne-like armchair, her disapproving gaze fixed firmly on Megan. Samantha, Richard's younger sister, sat on the edge of her seat, watching the scene with a slight smile, as if she were watching a show she had seen 1,000 times before. "What do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice was sharp, accusing, each word dripping with venom. Megan's fingers clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept her gaze down. She knew what was coming. This wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Richard had a way of twisting everything she did into something wrong, and Gloria, with her harsh opinions and critical remarks, never missed a chance to show Megan how weak she was. "I'm just trying to help," Megan said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, but she kept herself in check. Gloria's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Help? You've been helping for years, Megan. And look where it's gotten us. You can't do anything right." Megan could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the sting of her mother-in-law's words settling deep into her bones. It was the same every time, the same sharp criticisms, the same cold stares. She had spent years trying to fit in, trying to please Richard and his family, but it was never enough. Nothing she did was ever good enough for them. "You're so weak," Samantha chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why do you always act like everything's such a big deal? Just let Richard handle things, like you're supposed to." Megan's heart sank at the words. Weak. That's what they always called her. Weak for wanting to have a voice. Weak for standing up for herself. Weak for not letting Richard make all the decisions, for not letting Gloria control every part of her life. Richard stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was towering over her now, his face twisted in a mix of frustration and anger. "You can't keep doing this, Megan. You act like you know everything. You don't. I'm tired of your attitude, your constant complaining. Just accept it. I'm trying to make things work for this family, and you..." His words were harsh, filled with blame and resentment. "You're dragging us down with your whining. You always have to make everything harder than it needs to be." Megan felt the tears, threatening to spill, but she didn't let them fall. Not now, not in front of them. She had cried too many times before, begged for things to be different, begged Richard to hear her, to see her. It never worked. He just kept doing this, belittling her, calling her weak, and turning everyone against her. She stood there silent, as Richard's words continued to slice through her like blades. Finally, when the last of his words hung in the air like a weight she could no longer carry, Megan straightened her back. She took a deep breath and slowly turned away from the trio of angry, dismissive faces behind her. She didn't say a word. No explanations, no defense. She walked out of the room, each step heavier than the last, but each step felt like a small victory. She knew they were still talking behind her, probably plotting their next move, thinking she would break under the pressure like she always did. But this time was different. This time, Megan wasn't sure what was next, but she was sure of one thing. She was done playing their game. She couldn't remember when it had started to feel like she was walking on eggshells in her own home, when the constant criticism, the control, the manipulation had become so ingrained that she had forgotten what it felt like to be herself. But now, for the first time in a long while, Megan felt something stir inside of her. It wasn't anger, it wasn't rage. It was something far quieter, but infinitely stronger. It was a quiet resolve. Megan didn't know what she would do next. But she knew it was time to stop pretending everything was fine. The years of trying to please them, of shrinking herself, were over. Something inside her had cracked open, and for the first time in years, she could see the path ahead. A path that didn't involve Richard or his family. A path that would finally lead her to freedom. She walked into the hallway, her hand resting on the banister as she tried to steady her breath. It was time to make a choice. Megan sat on the edge of their bed, her hands resting in her lap, staring at the floor. The silence in the house was deafening now that Richard, Gloria, and Samantha were gone. For the first time in years, there was no loud laughter, no arguments echoing through the walls, just the sound of her own heartbeat. She could still hear Richard's voice in her mind, his cruel words looping in her head, and for a moment she wondered how she had ever put up with it for so long. The truth was, Megan had known something was wrong long before today. The small signs had been there, growing stronger as the years passed. At first, it had been the subtle put-downs, the way Richard would brush off her opinions, as if they were nothing more than background noise. Then came the way Gloria would insert herself into their marriage, offering unsolicited advice on how to fix Megan. And the way Samantha always had a cutting remark, a snide comment about how Megan wasn't good enough, how she would never measure up to their expectations. Megan had tried to ignore it. She had tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. She cooked, she cleaned, she tried to make everything work. She smiled when Richard came home, even when he barely acknowledged her. She laughed at Gloria's jokes, even though they stung, and she listened to Samantha's criticisms, even when they felt like they were chipping away at her soul. But today had been the final straw. Richard had yelled at her in front of them, his mother and sister nodding in agreement, as if they were all part of some twisted performance where she played the role of the villain. And in that moment, as his words echoed in her ears, something inside her snapped. She had spent too many years trying to be what they wanted, trying to fit into a mold that didn't suit her. She had tried to make Richard proud, but he never saw her as anything more than an extension of himself, a servant, a tool to be used. Megan felt her chest tighten as she thought about all the times she had tried to speak up, only to be shut down. She remembered the late-night conversations where she begged Richard to listen, to see her, to understand. But each time, he had told her the same thing. She was too emotional, too demanding, too much. And each time, she had swallowed her words, convinced herself that it was her fault. After all, everyone else seemed to think so. Richard, Gloria, Samantha, they all made it clear that Megan was the problem, that she was the one who needed to change. But as she sat on the bed, staring at the wall, Megan realized something she had never allowed herself to see before. She wasn't the problem. She wasn't weak. She wasn't too much. The problem had always been them. Richard's cruelty, Gloria's manipulation, Samantha's constant needling. They had all been playing a game, and Megan had been their pawn. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Rachel. "How are you doing? Are you okay?" Megan stared at the screen for a moment, her fingers itching to type back. But instead, she just sat there, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had spent years hiding behind a facade of calm, pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It hadn't been for a long time. Megan took a deep breath and picked up the phone. She typed back, "I'm done pretending, Rachel. I can't keep living like this." She paused before hitting send, her thumb hovering over the screen. What would Rachel think? Would she judge her for waiting so long to finally stand up for herself? Would she be angry for not saying something sooner? Megan didn't know, but she also knew that she didn't care anymore. The time for caring about their opinions, about their judgment, was over. Megan sent the message and tossed the phone back on the bed. She stood up, pacing the small room as her mind raced. She had been stuck in this cycle for so long, and now she was finally seeing the truth. Richard wasn't the man she had married. Gloria and Samantha weren't the family she had hoped for. They were all toxic, manipulative people who had chipped away at her for years, and somehow she had allowed it. She went to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The neighborhood seemed so peaceful, so normal compared to the chaos she felt inside. She longed for that peace. She longed for a life where she didn't have to walk on eggshells, where she didn't have to fear the next insult or the next cutting remark. She had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to make things work, but at what cost? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Rachel. Megan hesitated before answering, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. Hey! Rachel's voice came through the speaker, warm and concerned. What's going on? Are you okay? Megan took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I'm not okay, Rachel, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I will be. Rachel was silent for a moment, and then Megan heard a soft sigh. What happened? Megan swallowed hard. Richard yelled at me in front of his mother and sister, and they just nodded and agreed with him. They called me weak, Rachel, and I just can't do it anymore. I've tried for so long, but I'm done. I can't keep letting them treat me like this. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Megan could almost hear Rachel processing the words. Finally, she spoke. Megan, I'm so sorry. You don't deserve that. You never have. But I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. You're not weak. You're stronger than you know. Megan felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes starting to sting with unshed tears. She hadn't realized how badly she needed to hear those words, how much she needed someone to tell her that she wasn't crazy, that she wasn't the problem. I don't know what to do next, Megan admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to get out of this. You don't have to do it alone, Rachel said firmly. I'm here for you, Megan. We'll figure it out together. But you have to take that first step. You can't let them control you anymore. Megan stood by the window, looking out at the world beyond. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. It wouldn't be easy, and she didn't know where this path would lead her, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let Richard or Gloria or Samantha control her any longer. She was done being the victim. It was time to take control of her own life. Thank you, Rachel, Megan said, her voice steady for the first time in what felt like forever. I'm ready to make a change. Megan sat on the couch, her phone in her hand, staring at the text message from Rachel. I'm here for you, Rachel had said. The words echoed in her mind, and for the first time in years, Megan felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in so long. Hope. But that hope was clouded by a gnawing fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the consequences of standing up for herself, and fear of what would happen when she finally stopped playing their game. It wasn't just about Richard, Gloria, and Samantha anymore. It was about Megan. She had spent so many years pushing her own needs and desires to the side, burying her voice beneath layers of guilt and shame. She had been living in a world where she constantly apologized for things she hadn't even done, where she had allowed others to define who she was and what she deserved. But now, everything was different. She could no longer live in that suffocating space. The weight of the past had to be lifted, and she had to start taking steps toward freedom. She stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the street below. The world was still going on outside, people walking by, cars driving past, life moving forward. And for the first time, Megan felt like she was standing on the edge of something new. A new life, a new chapter, one where she could take control of her own story. But how? The question weighed on her, and Megan felt a lump form in her throat as she thought about everything she had endured. The years of walking on eggshells, trying to keep everyone happy, never once thinking about what would make her happy. She had become a shadow of herself, a version of Megan that was molded by the expectations of Richard and his family. She had tried so hard to meet their standards, but it was never enough. The more she gave, the more they took. The more she bent, the more they broke her. And today it was all too clear. The line had been crossed. Richard's yelling, his mother's judgment, Samantha's cold, dismissive attitude. It had been the final straw. Megan had stood there, quietly absorbing it all, but deep down, she had known that she couldn't go on pretending anymore. She couldn't keep sacrificing her dignity for the sake of keeping the peace. Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of her phone. It was Rachel again, this time calling. Megan hesitated for a moment, but then she answered. "Hey." Rachel's voice was warm and comforting. "How are you holding up?" Megan sat back down on the couch, the silence of the house pressing in on her. She closed her eyes and let out a slow breath before answering. "I don't know, Rachel. I've been thinking about everything, about how I've been living my life for so long, just trying to please them, trying to make everything work. But it's never been enough. I feel like I've been suffocating and I don't know how to get out of it." "I know it's not easy," Rachel said softly. "But you have to start by making the decision to change. You can't keep living this way. You deserve to be happy, Megan. You deserve peace." Megan let the words sink in. And for the first time, she realized how much she had been denying herself. All these years, she had been waiting for someone else to validate her worth. She had been waiting for Richard to love her the way she needed, for Gloria and Samantha to finally accept her, for everyone to approve of her. But that day had never come. And now Megan understood that she couldn't keep waiting. She had to take the first step on her own. No one could do it for her. Not Richard, not Gloria, not Samantha. No one. "I'm scared, Rachel," Megan confessed, her voice trembling. "What if they come after me? What if Richard makes it worse? What if I can't handle it? Megan, you've already handled more than most people ever could. You're stronger than you think, but you don't have to handle this alone. You have me, and you have the strength to walk away from this." Megan wiped her eyes, realizing just how much she needed to hear those words. Rachel was right. She wasn't alone, not anymore. And she didn't have to keep tolerating the abuse, the manipulation, the constant belittling. It was time for her to stand up for herself, to finally be the person she had always wanted to be. "Okay," Megan said, her voice steadier now. "Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to stop being afraid." Rachel's voice was filled with warmth. "That's the spirit. You can do this, Megan. You've already taken the first step by acknowledging the truth. Now it's time to move forward." One step at a time, Megan stood up, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't going to let Richard or his family control her anymore. She wasn't going to let them dictate her worth. She was going to take her life back, no matter how difficult it might be. She picked up her phone and began typing a message to Richard. It wasn't a long message, but it was direct, and it was final. "I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm taking back my life." She hit send, and as the message disappeared into the ether, Megan felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had made the choice. She had made the decision to stop living for them and start living for herself. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, Megan felt like she was walking towards something better. Megan sat in her small kitchen, the steady hum of the refrigerator, the only sound filling the silence. The house felt empty now, the weight of Richard's absence in every corner. He hadn't come home that night, nor had he texted or called. For the first time in years, Megan didn't feel the pang of worry or the need to try to fix things. She was done fixing. The message to Richard had been sent, and there had been no immediate reaction, which was a small relief. Megan couldn't have handled any more of his angry words or manipulative tactics right now. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her phone again, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she had been avoiding for years. Rachel. She hit dial and waited. The phone rang twice before Rachel's voice came through, warm and familiar. "Hey, Megan, what's going on?" Megan's throat tightened as she fought the sudden wave of emotion. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear Rachel's voice, to be reminded that she wasn't alone in this. "I did it," Megan said quietly, her voice still shaky. "I sent the message. I told him I'm done. I'm leaving. There." Was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Rachel's voice softened. "Megan, that's huge. I'm proud of you. How do you feel?" Megan let out a shaky breath. "I feel free. But I also feel scared, like I'm standing at the edge of something I don't fully understand. What if he makes it hard? What if he—" "Megan," Rachel interrupted gently. "You've been living in that fear for years. You've been trapped in this cycle of trying to make things work, of constantly questioning yourself. You're not afraid of him anymore. You're not afraid of anything anymore." The reassurance in Rachel's words was exactly what Megan needed to hear. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the weight of Rachel's encouragement to settle in. "I don't know what to do next," Megan admitted. "I don't know how to take the next step. I don't know where to go from here." "You're not alone in this," Rachel reminded her. "I'm here, Megan. I've got your back. You don't have to figure it all out by yourself." Megan nodded, even though Rachel couldn't see her. The warmth in Rachel's words made her feel like she was no longer carrying the weight of this alone. She wasn't sure where the path ahead would take her, but knowing that Rachel was there, ready to help, gave her a sense of relief she hadn't known in years. "I need to figure out where to go," Megan said, her voice quiet. "I can't stay here. I can't stay in this house anymore. It feels like everything here reminds me of them." "You don't have to stay there," Rachel said immediately. "You're not trapped. I know a few places. I can help you find something temporary, something safe. You need space to breathe, to think clearly. And when you're ready, we can start looking for a more permanent solution." Megan's chest tightened, but she felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Rachel. I don't even know what to say." "There's nothing to say, Megan. You've already done the hardest part. You've made the decision to stop living their life for you. Now you just have to take the next steps, one at a time." The next few hours were a blur. Megan packed a few things in a bag, just the essentials: her clothes, her phone charger, and a few personal items. As she moved through the house, the weight of the years spent trying to make everything perfect for Richard, for Gloria, and for Samantha became almost suffocating. Every corner of the house, every room had been tainted by their influence. Her hands shook as she closed the door behind her, the house that had once been her home now feeling more like a prison. She locked the door, her heart pounding, but there was no going back now. She had made her decision. Rachel had found a small apartment for Megan in a safe part of town, one that was available for rent immediately. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. It was the first step to reclaiming her life, to finding her own space, her own peace. As Megan drove through the streets, she could feel the weight of her decision beginning to lift. She wasn't sure what her future looked like or how she would navigate the challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of control, a sense of power over her own life. When she arrived at the apartment, the small space felt foreign, but it also felt like freedom. There was no one here to judge her, no one to belittle her. It was a blank slate, a place where she could rebuild, a place where she could start to remember who she was before all the years of manipulation and control. Megan put her bag down on the couch and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The world was still moving, still spinning, But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was stuck in place. She was moving forward. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Rachel. "You're not alone in this, Megan. We'll figure it out together." Megan smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally start living her own life. The apartment felt strange at first, like a space she wasn't quite supposed to occupy. Megan sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing. She had spent years living in the shadows of her husband's expectations, her mother-in-law's harsh judgments, and her sister-in-law's cold, condescending remarks. Now, she was in a space that was entirely hers. But the weight of all that had happened was still there, lingering in her chest. The quiet was both comforting and unsettling. It was a stark contrast to the constant noise of Richard's demands and Gloria's sharp comments. In the stillness of her new home, Megan had time to think, and the more she thought, the more she realized just how deeply she had been buried under the weight of their expectations. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through her contacts. Her thumb hovered over the name Richard, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel the compulsive need to check on him, to make sure he wasn't angry or upset. That was the old Megan, the one who tried to keep everything together, no matter how much it cost her. A message from Rachel popped up on the screen. "How are you doing? Do you need anything?" Megan smiled to herself and quickly typed back, "I'm doing okay. It's strange, but it's peaceful. I think this is what I needed. Thank you for helping me." Rachel's response came almost instantly. "You've got this, Megan. You're strong. I'm proud of you for making it this far. Just take it one day at a time." Megan stared at the message, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Rachel had always been there for her, even when things felt impossible. And now, she realized, it was time to finally take her life back. She stood up, pacing the small apartment as her mind began to race again. What was next? How did she take the next step in her new life? The decision to leave Richard was monumental, but it didn't end there. There was so much more to unravel, so much more to rebuild. Megan had lived in a world where she was constantly questioning herself, constantly trying to please everyone else. But now she realized it was time to start asking herself what she wanted. The first step was clear. She needed to get her life back on track. She needed a job, a source of income, something to give her stability while she figured out what came next. She had been a stay-at-home wife for years, taking care of everything in the house, cooking, cleaning, and trying to make Richard happy. But now, it was time to build something for herself. Megan took a deep breath and pulled out her laptop, opening the job search website Rachel had recommended. As she typed in her resume, she felt a sense of empowerment, a quiet excitement building inside of her. This was her chance. This was her opportunity to do something for herself. She wasn't going to rely on Richard or anyone else anymore. The process was slow, and Megan found herself stumbling over old fears. She hesitated at each line, wondering if she was doing enough, wondering if she was good enough to land a job after so many years away from the workforce. But then she stopped. Herself. She couldn't let these old doubts control her anymore. She had to push through, even if it was uncomfortable, even if it felt like she was stepping into the unknown. By the end of the night, Megan had sent out a few applications. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Megan felt a sense of pride. She was taking charge of her own future, one small step at a time. The following days were a blur of new beginnings. Megan spent her mornings applying for jobs, her afternoons walking around the city to get a feel for her new environment. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with small cafes and friendly faces. It felt like a fresh start, a new chapter she had never expected to find. But there were moments when the weight of the past still crept up on her. Richard, Gloria, and Samantha still lingered in her thoughts, like ghosts haunting her every step. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart skipped a beat, expecting it to be a message from one of them, trying to pull her back into their toxic web. One evening, as Megan was walking home from a cafe, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her heart thudded in her chest as she hesitated before answering. Megan? The voice on the other end was Richard's. Her stomach churned at the sound of his voice. She had been preparing for this moment, but hearing him speak to her again felt like a punch to the gut. What do you want? Megan's voice was steady, but inside, her emotions were a whirlwind. Where are you? Richard's tone was cold, demanding. You think you can just walk out like nothing happened? You don't get to do that. Megan closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before responding. I'm not coming back, Richard. I've made my decision. I'm done. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Megan could hear Richard's breathing, heavy with frustration, but she stood firm. You can't just leave me, Megan. We're family, Richard said, his voice shaking with anger. No, Richard, Megan said, her voice stronger now. We're not family anymore. I don't owe you anything. You and your family have broken me down for years. I'm done pretending. I'm taking my life back. The silence on the other end was deafening. Megan could almost hear him trying to process her words, but there was no turning back now. I hope you can find peace, Richard, Megan said quietly before hanging up. The finality of the decision settled over her like a weight, but this time it felt like freedom. She put her phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The streets were still bustling with life, filled with people moving towards their futures. And for the first time, Megan felt like she was moving toward hers. Megan spent the following week trying to adjust to her new routine. The quiet mornings, the time to herself, felt strange at first, but also liberating. The city around her buzzed with life, and for the first time, Megan felt like she was part of something bigger than the small world Richard and his family had tried to trap her in. The weight of the past few years still lingered, but every day it seemed a little lighter. She continued applying for jobs, attending interviews, and slowly rebuilding the confidence she had lost along the way. Megan had always been sharp, capable, and intelligent, but somewhere in the years of living under the shadow of Richard's criticisms and his family's control, she had forgotten just how much she could accomplish. Every small victory, every email she sent, every job interview she nailed, was a reminder of her strength. But there were moments when the quiet became overwhelming. She would be walking down the street, lost in thought, when suddenly a pang of guilt would hit her. Was she making the right choice? Was she doing the right thing? The old fears that Richard and his family had planted in her mind, fears of being alone, fears of being judged, fears of being unworthy, still haunted her. One afternoon, as Megan was preparing a simple lunch in her new kitchen, her phone buzzed again. She recognized the number. It was Rachel. Hey, how's everything going? Rachel's voice was warm, steady, like the reassuring presence she had always been. Megan let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It's going okay. I'm still getting used to everything, but I'm starting to feel like myself again. I'm so glad to hear that, Rachel said. Have you thought about next steps? You mentioned you were going to start looking into getting your own place. I already did, Megan replied. It's just, I've been busy with job applications, interviews. I haven't had the time to really focus on that yet. Rachel's voice softened. It's okay. Take your time. You've done so much already. But I'm here to help, okay? Whenever you're ready, I'll help you look into places. Megan smiled, grateful for Rachel's unwavering support. Thanks, Rachel. I don't think I would have made it this far without you. The conversation shifted and they spoke about small things, funny stories from Rachel's day, news about mutual friends, anything to keep the heaviness at bay. Megan needed those moments of normalcy. She didn't want to think too much about what came next, or dwell on the unknowns. She just needed to keep moving forward. But as Megan sat down that evening, going over a few job listings, she felt the familiar sting of doubt creeping in. She had been away from the workforce for so long, and the idea of finding something fulfilling, something that could truly support her, felt almost impossible. Richard's voice echoed in her mind, mocking her, calling her weak, calling her incapable of standing on her own. His words had been like a constant hum in her ears, slowly eroding her sense of self-worth. But now, she refused to listen. She was determined to silence his voice once and for all. She closed the laptop and grabbed her coat, deciding to take a walk to clear her head. She needed space to breathe, to escape the constant noise in her mind. As she stepped outside, the cool air hit her face, and for the first time in a while, she felt a sense of peace. The city was bustling around her, but in that moment it felt like she was walking alone, carving out her own path. Megan strolled through the park, watching. Families walk by, couples holding hands, people out enjoying the sunny afternoon. She felt like an outsider, a stranger in a world that had never really been hers. But at the same time, she felt a small flicker of hope. She could be a part of this world. She could make a life for herself outside of Richard's shadow. Her phone buzzed again. Megan pulled it from her pocket and saw a text from Rachel. "I found a couple of apartments. Some are a bit far out, but they're in a safe area. We can check them out together whenever you're ready." Megan smiled at the thought. Rachel was always one step ahead, always taking action. It gave Megan the courage to keep pushing forward. She wasn't doing this alone. She had support, and that made all the difference. The rest of the evening passed in a blur as Megan reviewed more job listings and began looking at the apartments Rachel had sent. Slowly but surely, she was piecing her life back together, one step at a time. The next day, Megan received an email. It was a job offer, a position she had applied for a week earlier. She read through the email several times, making sure she hadn't misread it. She had done it. She had finally found something for herself. The job wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and that was all she needed right now. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Rachel. "Megan," Rachel said excitedly, "I just heard. You got the job." "I got the job," Megan repeated, as if the words weren't quite real. "I really got it." "I knew you would," Rachel cheered. "You've been working so hard. This is just the beginning, Megan." Megan's heart soared as she looked out the window of her apartment. For the first time in so long, she could see the future, and it was bright. She had made the choice to take control of her life. She was no longer a prisoner to the expectations of others. And for the first time in years, she was starting to remember who she was. The woman who was strong, capable, and worthy of a life of her own. Megan had come a long way, but she wasn't finished yet. The journey was just beginning. Megan stood in front of the full-length mirror in her apartment, staring at her reflection. She had just come from her first day at the new job. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't exactly what she had imagined for herself, but it was a start. She had a paycheck now, and she was doing it on her own. She had taken the first step toward independence, toward living the life she had always deserved, but had been too afraid to claim. She had spent so many years doubting herself, convinced that she was incapable of anything more than what Richard and his family told her she was. But today, as she stood there, she saw someone new staring back at her. She saw someone who had the strength to walk away from a life she thought she was trapped in. She saw someone who had reclaimed her own voice, her own purpose. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Richard's name. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't hesitate. She swiped the screen and answered. "Megan," Richard's voice came through, low and controlled, but there was something underneath it, something frantic. "We need to talk." Megan's breath caught in her throat, but she held her ground. "I don't think there's anything left to talk about, Richard." "I don't understand what's happening here," he continued. "You can't just leave me like this. We've been together for so long. You're making a mistake." Megan's grip on the phone tightened. She had expected this. She knew it would come. Richard would try to pull her back in, try to manipulate her into thinking she was making a mistake, that she needed him, that this was all just some misunderstanding. But she wasn't that woman anymore. "No, Richard," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not making a mistake. You're the one who's been making mistakes, you and your family. You've treated me like I wasn't even a person. I'm done trying to fix everything for you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Megan could almost hear him trying to process her words, but she wasn't going to back down. She had spent so many years being quiet, being small, being the person everyone expected her to be. Now, for the first time in a long time, she was speaking her truth. "Megan," Richard said, his voice shaking with frustration, "you're being unreasonable. You can't just walk away from everything we built. You can't just throw it all away because of a couple of arguments." Megan could feel the tears starting to well up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "It's not just a couple of arguments, Richard. It's years of manipulation, years of me questioning who I am, years of feeling like I wasn't good enough. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing to live for myself. For the first time in years, I'm choosing me." She could hear Richard take a deep breath, and for a moment it seemed like he might finally understand. But then his voice came again, cold and sharp. "You'll regret this, Megan. You'll regret leaving everything behind." "I won't regret it," Megan replied firmly. "I've already spent too many years regretting things I never should have. This is my life now, Richard, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel guilty for choosing to take it back." Richard didn't respond right away, and for a few seconds there was only the sound of his breathing on the other end. Megan waited, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what she expected him to say, some desperate plea, some final attempt to manipulate her, but instead the line went silent. She waited a few more seconds, but nothing came. "Megan," Richard finally spoke, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, but don't think you can walk away from me and everything we've been through. You'll always be part of my life." Megan closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over her. There was a time when they would have broken her, when she would have begged for his approval, for him to choose her, but not anymore. Not now. "I'm not part of your life anymore, Richard," she said calmly but with conviction. "I'm part of my own life now, and I'm going to make it count." She hung up before he could respond, setting the phone down on the table with a quiet finality. For a moment, Megan just stood there, staring at the phone. It felt surreal. She had just told Richard that she was done. She had finally cut the cord, severed the last tie that had bound her to him, to his family. Her heart was still pounding, her body still trembling with the weight of the conversation, but she felt lighter than she had in years. It wasn't about hate or anger. It was about reclaiming her space in the world, her right to live without fear, without constant criticism, without constantly being told she wasn't enough. Megan walked over to the window and gazed out at the city below. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over everything. The world was still moving, still turning, and Megan was moving with it. The past was behind her, and the future was waiting. For the first time in so long, Megan felt truly free. The days that followed were a blur of new beginnings. Megan settled into her routine, her days filled with job applications, interviews, and small victories. Each time she secured an interview or sent out another resume, it felt like a step further away from the life she had left behind. She had, never realized just how much of herself she had sacrificed until she began to reclaim those pieces one by one. But despite the growing sense of independence, the quiet would sometimes become overwhelming. Richard's words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the man he used to be and the person she had once tried to be for him. Every time the phone rang or a text message popped up, Megan's heart would skip a beat, and her first thought was always about him. What would he say? What would he do next? It was hard to shake the feeling that he would somehow find a way back into her life, dragging her back into the chaos. She spent her evenings reading, meditating, or talking to Rachel. But even as she did so, the weight of the past still loomed over her, a reminder that the emotional wounds she had sustained hadn't fully healed. She couldn't let herself fall back into old patterns of second-guessing or doubting her decision to leave. Richard had been toxic. Gloria had been toxic. Samantha, too. They had worked together to make her feel small, to make her believe she wasn't worthy of anything better. Then one evening, as she was about to step out for a walk, Megan's phone buzzed again. Her stomach tightened as she saw the name flashing on the screen. It was from Richard's number, but this time, it wasn't a call. It was a text message. "We need to talk. You can't just leave like this. You owe me an explanation." Megan stared at the message for a long time. There it was, his words, his control. Even from a distance, Richard still thought he had the right to demand things from her, to make her feel guilty for making the choice to walk away. Her fingers hovered over the phone, the old habit of responding, of explaining herself, tugging at her. But then a wave of clarity washed over her. No, she didn't owe him anything. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. She had already said everything that needed to be said. Her thumb moved swiftly across the screen as she typed out her response. "I don't owe you an explanation, Richard. I've made my decision. I'm not going to go back." She hit send before. She could talk herself out of it. There was no turning back now. She had said what needed to be said, and for the first time, she felt completely certain about her decision. The silence after sending the message felt deafening. Richard didn't reply immediately, and Megan spent the next few minutes pacing around her small apartment, her anxiety rising. Was he going to try to manipulate her again? Was he going to beg her to come back? The phone remained silent. Minutes stretched into an hour, but still no response. Megan sat down on the couch, feeling a small sense of relief. She wasn't sure what she had expected from Richard, but she had made the decision to stop waiting for him to change, to stop hoping that he would suddenly see the light and apologize for everything. The silence was broken when Rachel called, her voice cheerful on the other end. "Hey, how's everything going? I saw your text." "You did the right thing, Megan. You don't owe him anything." Megan smiled, even though she could hear the slight shakiness in her voice. "I know. It's hard. It's like a part of me still wants him to fight for me. But I know that's not what I need. I need to keep moving forward." "You are," Rachel said firmly. "And you're not alone in this. I'm here, every step of the way. Don't forget that." Megan let the words sink in. She wasn't alone, not anymore. And Richard's silence was a sign, not of defeat, but of his realization that he no longer had control over her. That chapter of her life was truly over. A few days later, Megan received a package at her door. It was a small box, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it, and inside was a stack of documents. Divorce papers. The reality of what she had done hit her all over again. This wasn't just about leaving Richard. It was about making sure that the life she had left behind stayed in the past, where it belonged. She sat down at the table, the papers spread out in front of her. The reality of divorce, the finality of it, was something she had been preparing for. But seeing the documents in front of her made her stomach churn. She wasn't ready for this. But then she remembered something Rachel had told her. "You've already taken the hardest step. The rest is just paperwork." Megan smiled faintly, feeling a sense of control wash over her. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was something she could handle. And in that moment, as she signed the papers, Megan knew that this was the last tie that bound her to Richard and his toxic family. The phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. She didn't even check the screen. She knew it was Richard, and for the first time, she didn't feel a sense of panic. She didn't feel the need to answer. She had already said everything that needed to be said. She stood up, walked over to the window, and watched as the sun began to set, the colors in the sky painting a picture of possibility. Megan's life was hers now, and no one could take that from her. Megan stared at the documents on the table. She had signed them, finally, decisively. The divorce papers were now in her hands, no longer just a symbol of her past, but a concrete step toward her future. The phone had stopped buzzing, the silence between her and Richard stretching into something almost comforting. His calls had become less frequent, and his attempts at manipulating her were now met with nothing but her indifference. This was her life now, and she was taking control of it, one document, one choice at a time. The apartment was still small, quiet, and simple, but it was hers. It had become a symbol of everything she was building, a fresh start. Yet as much as she reveled in her newfound freedom, a part of her still found it hard to let go of everything. The memories, the quiet promises to herself she had made years ago when she first got married, lingered. But now, those promises no longer applied to the woman she was becoming. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the marriage with hope and trust. She had shed that skin piece by piece until she was standing on her own. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't from Richard. It was from Rachel. "I found a few more places. Some of them are really nice. Do you want to check them? Out this weekend." Megan smiled at the message. Rachel had become more than just a friend. She was a lifeline. It had been Rachel who had encouraged her to leave, who had reminded her that she was strong enough to do this. Now, every step Megan took, she took knowing that she wasn't walking alone. Megan tapped out a quick reply. "Yes, I'd love to. Let's do it. I'm ready." It was time. Time to find a place that would be entirely hers. Time to build a life that was not shaped by Richard's expectations or his family's manipulations. Time to live on her own terms. That weekend, Megan and Rachel spent the afternoon touring apartments. They saw places in neighborhoods she had never thought she would afford, places with sunlight streaming in through big windows, spaces where Megan could truly breathe. With each step, she felt her confidence grow. She was no longer the woman who had accepted being ignored or belittled. She was the woman who was choosing herself, choosing a future she could be proud of. Rachel's excitement matched her own. "I can't believe how many great options we've found. You're going to have your pick. Look at you, starting a new chapter." Megan nodded, but she didn't speak for a moment. She was beginning to feel like this was real. Every step forward was a statement, a declaration to herself that she was capable, strong, and worthy of a life beyond the one Richard had tried to dictate. "I'm just glad it's happening," Megan finally said, her voice tinged with both exhaustion and exhilaration. "I didn't think I'd make it this far." "You've made it this far," Rachel said with a grin. "And you're going to keep going, one day at a time, right?" Megan laughed softly, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. They continued their tour, each apartment showing her something new, something exciting. It wasn't just about finding a place to live. It was about finding a place where she could finally feel free, where she could fully embrace the woman she was becoming. By the end of the day, Megan had narrowed it down to two choices. One was a cozy one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with a small balcony and a kitchen she could see herself cooking in. The other was a loft-style apartment with more space, closer to the heart of the city. Both were beautiful, both felt right, but one thing was clear. Each was a reflection of her choice to live for herself. Megan looked at Rachel, who was beaming with pride. "I think I found my place." Rachel hugged her tightly. "You deserve it, Megan. You really do." The decision was made. Megan would move into the smaller apartment. It was a perfect start, a place where she could build her life from the ground up. She wasn't just finding a home, she was claiming her future. The following week, Megan signed the lease. The apartment was officially hers. It felt surreal, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. She had been so afraid of the unknown, of the future, but now she realized that the unknown wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. Megan moved in slowly, taking her time with each box, carefully placing things where they belonged. As she unpacked, she found that she was letting go of old memories, old fears, and replacing them with new ones. Memories of strength, courage, and self-love. The first night she slept in her new apartment, she woke up to the sound of nothing. No angry words, no manipulative voices, no judgments. Just silence. It was the kind of silence she had longed for, and for the first time in years, Megan felt truly at peace. Megan woke up with the soft light of dawn filtering through her window. The apartment was quiet, serene. For a moment, she almost didn't recognize the peacefulness. It had been so long since she had woken up to such calm, to a life free from the constant noise of manipulation and control. The new space felt like a fresh start. There were still boxes to unpack, some areas of the apartment that needed to be filled with things that made it truly hers. But even as she stood there, looking at the bare walls and empty shelves, Megan couldn't help but smile.